Welcome to all of you for this discussion on food inflation, diagnosis and remedies. I'll briefly introduce our four speakers. The lead speaker would be Dr. Ashok Gulati, whom I think all of you know. He is currently the Chair Professor of Agriculture at ICRIER. Prior to this, for 3 years, he was Chairman of the CACP, and he has been in IFPRI and IEG. He has also written a large number of books. He has been on the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and he has also published a book on the comparison of China and India on agriculture and rural reforms in collaboration with Mr. Shen. Dr. Gulati has also been recently made a member of the panel that will look at restructuring of FCI, which is headed by Mr. Shantaka Kumar. Although the presentation would be made by Dr. Gulati, but his colleague Shweta Saini has contributed largely to the detailed work that has gone into this presentation. And is she here? Shweta? Ah, yeah, there she is. Okay. So we are grateful to Dr. Gulati and Shweta for giving us this presentation today, which will form the basis of the discussions. Our next speaker is Mr. T.K. Arun, Editor Opinion of the Economic Times. He has been with the Economic Times since 1994, except for a brief period when he was an online news portal, Naraz Online. He has worked with the Kerala Planning Board, and he's done his Master's in Economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. Our third speaker is Shri Pravesh Sharma, who's from the Indian Administrative Service. He is currently the Managing Director of the SFAC, the Smart Farmers Agribusiness Consortium. He has also spent many years on food issues. He was visiting fellow at Princeton, USA, researching food issues. He was with IFAT, dealing with issues of agriculture, rural poverty, microfinance and women's empowerment from 2001 to 2006. And he has also been writing extensively on agriculture and related issues. In SFAC, he has been doing a lot of interesting work on organizing farmers, and I'm sure he will dwell on that when he speaks. Our fourth speaker today is Mr. Praveen Dwivedi, who is the President, Food Business of the Future Consumer Enterprise Limited. He has over 3 decades of experience in various businesses relating to food, agri-retail and FMCG. And he is a domain expert in these areas. He is also managing and supervising the construction of the mega food park in near Tumkur, and which he tells me is almost complete, and they would start sometime next month the operations. So now I request Dr. Gulati to make the presentation, and I also request him that after the presentations by the presentations or interjections by the 3 speakers on the dais, he may kindly moderate the discussion. We expect Dr. Gulati's presentation to take between 15 to 20 minutes, and thereafter each speaker would have about 10 minutes. So we'll have about an hour from 8 to 9 for discussions. So, Dr. Gulati, please.
Thank you very much. Fellow panelists and distinguished audience. It's really heartening to see some very familiar faces, particularly those who are right now handling the policy. Mr. Sudhir is here, Food Secretary. It's one of the major jobs that he has to do. Siraji is here on food processing. I'll be talking certain things, and I'll welcome if they can effectively participate in terms of what the government thinking is how to control the prices. I need not say anything why controlling food inflation is critical in this country, which has the largest mass of poverty and malnutrition in the world. So that is taken for granted that this is a critical thing to control, and I think beyond 10% can create not only economic problems but also social and political problems. What I'm going to focus is on three things. Food inflation, what has been the nature and structure of food inflation in India, and I'm going to look at not just today, what is happening to onions or potatoes or tomatoes, but in a somewhat medium to long-term perspective what has happened. And then we will come to the critical question, and that's where the real meat of the presentation would be diagnostics. What is causing somewhat different scenario in the last 3, 4, 5 years than has been the case in earlier years? So what has gone wrong? Where have we gone wrong in policy? And out of that will come what the prescription or what policymakers can hopefully do. Let's try to see this. The inflation, if you look at from 95, 96 onwards, and 3 periods if you try to divide, politically, we had this NDA period. It's interesting to see that food inflation was below the WPI overall inflation in the country. Again, even in UPA 1, food inflation was a little below the overall inflation in the country. But what has happened here, it's not only 4.1 and 5.9, we can simply say 4 and 6, and then it has jumped to 10.3, but it is much higher than the overall inflation. So that means this is pulling the overall inflation also. So this distinction of the UPA 2 period must be kept in mind. Now within food inflation, technically we must understand what is food inflation. Food inflation has 2 major components. One is called the food articles and one is called the food products. Products are more like processed part of food, and articles are more like the fresh and the raw part of the food. And what you can see, because this will have implications when I come to policy, you would see that the processed part always has shown somewhat lower rate of inflation than the food articles, which have been growing much, much faster. So if overall food inflation here was 10.3%, the food articles inflation is 12.2% and food products is only 7%. So this will have implications in terms of policy. Now there is a new thing that newspapers have been lately writing about, and that's the CPI concept. Country is more or less in a transition, changing from the WPI story to the CPI story, Consumer Price Index. But that is more recent. From 2011 they have worked out. Earlier we had this for the agriculture labor and industrial labor separate, but now the weights and all that. What I want to highlight here is that the food in the last 3 years average, if you take, the WPI was showing 8.7, last 3 years only, and CPI is 11.5. That means the consumer, from his angle or her angle, when you look at inflation, it is even more pinching than the wholesale story that we look at. And this is largely coming from fruits or this oil, those types of things. The weights of the 2 series are very different. And if you see the weights of food in overall WPI of all commodities, that's about 24% because it is based on the production weights in the basket, what is being produced in the country of all the commodities, how much is food. But when you go to the consumption side story of the total consumption that the consumers are making, 49% for almost 50% is food. That's where I think we need to be careful that for consumers, this is a killer. Now, if you look at the structure of food inflation in the last 3 years at least, what is happening, that much of the inflation is coming from this segment, which is fruits and vegetables, milk, and then eggs and meat. These are perishable commodities, what we call the high value agriculture. And that's where an indication of that is when the incomes rise, people are not going to be consuming more of wheat and rice. They are going to be switching their consumption patterns to better food, more protein and more vitamins. And that is where the pressure is coming. And unfortunately, this segment doesn't have proper supply lines. The value chains are very fragmented and not very well structured. And that's where all these spikes and troughs that we feel, that's where it comes from. And I'm sure you're going to be talking about more on those, what the solutions are. So now this is where I think it's a work that Shweta and me have been doing for quite some time, and we want to share and have your frank reaction on that. You know, when we talk about prices, basically it's a supply and demand mismatch. That's why the prices start going up. What is coming from the supply side? One is the question of availability. But at what cost the availability is there? For the commodity, availability can be from domestic production or it can be imported. What is the cost of domestic production and what is the cost of importing food? That is what will decide the supply side of the equation. And that's where I want to highlight something which has not been talked enough in the literature on food inflation. And I'll show that one of the critical parameters, you know, when we talk about what the farmers are paying for different inputs, one of the key inputs is farm labor. Out of the paid out costs of the labor, of the total what the farmer is paying, labor costs of the paid out costs are almost 40%. So that's the big chunk. And what is happening there, we'll talk in a minute. Second, the supplies can come from outside, and this particular globalization factor works on both sides. Supply side, if you are importing, but demand side, if you are exporting. So if there is demand for your commodities outside, then your domestic prices will take a lift depending upon where it is going and what is the price in the global markets. So your prices try to get convergence towards the global prices. And if there are export restrictions or import high duties that you can temporarily perhaps play and keep the wedge, but sooner or later we will show that India cannot be insulated anymore from the global market. So that's another major factor that will come into play. The third factor, and that has been talked about in literature, is what went wrong on our fiscal and monetary policies and how much pressure that has been creating. So I'll concentrate on these three. Look at this. This is perhaps for the first time in the history of this country, this increase in the farm wages. This has never happened, I think, in the last 30, 40 years if you look at the data. What is causing that? It's another major area to explore, but many people think it's Manrega that is pulling up farm wages. Manrega is a minor part of the story. We have done a full paper, which is separate paper. I can't get into the details. We can get in question answer session. The real story, 80 to 90% story of wages going up, farm wages, is a full story. The story of growth in construction industry, overall growth in the country, and also agriculture growth that took place during this period. So it's the growth story which is pulling up, and for the first time in history, in absolute number, the agriculture labor force has declined. First time in absolute terms. So all these factors have created this scenario And that's very interesting, because if wages were rising by 19% per annum on an average, despite the food inflation hovering around 10%, 11%, if the nominal wages of the farm workers, which are at the lowest of the run, are increasing at 19%, their real wages were going up by almost 7-8%. And that is the reason you have the fastest decline in poverty between 2004 and 11 compared to 93 and 2004, whichever the way you want to define poverty line. I don't want to get into that mess of what is the poverty line, but you look at the trends will show you it's a much, and that's because of this factor. Look at the global story. Now the global story is, this is the FAO food price index, and this is the domestic food price index. And this is the period when we put export bans. When the prices were erupting after 2007-8, world prices went up so steeply, our prices were controlled. In fact, it is remarkable, 2007-8, when the world was crying about the food prices, our cereal prices increased by just 5%, 6%. But then, what happened? In 2007, 8, 9, and I'll come down to that because many people feel MSP is the reason behind inflation. MSPs were raised by 20% per annum in 7, 8 and 8, 9. And that's still below what was happening in the world. You have to compensate. So insulation completely is just not possible. You will converge sooner or later, but gradually. So that's relevant. Good news is, this has been tapering off now. After reaching this, this is coming down, and if this keeps going up, there is something wrong in our domestic policy, and there would be a possibility of using the trade policy to tame the domestic prices. The third factor that I talked about, the fiscal and monetary policy, what went wrong? And look at this. This is the fiscal deficit in absolute level. This is what was happening all these years, and suddenly, you look at, it went up by 132% in 1 year. Now what do you expect? And look at the money supply accordingly, M3, the way it was increasing. So if fiscal deficit went up, and this is what we call, it was a part of the global stimulus. It suited the government very well because it was just before the elections of 2009. And loan waiver or expansion of Manrega or many other schemes, which were creating more of consumption pressure rather than production capacity. And that created pressures on the demand side. So too much money chasing too few goods, that result will be hard inflation. Now we tried to look at this entire thing econometrically, that how far we can explain all this through equation, and 99% of the variation in food prices in India can be explained by three factors. All the coefficients are statistically significant. Sorry if this is becoming a little technical. We also tested the causality test, Grinders, and so this is for the academic people if they want to discuss. There is a perception in many quarters that MSP has caused inflation. And as I said, in 2007, 8, 9, MSPs were raised by 20% per annum. 2 years, so roughly 40% increase in 2 years that you had. But that was when you are putting an export control. Now you talk about liberalization for the entire economy, but when farmers have to get some benefit, you try to put export controls. That's where some compensation was given to the farmers, and the costs were increasing, as I showed on the. So costs were increasing, and if you put an export control, you can't squeeze them from both ends. Costs are increasing, export controls, there is going to be eruption of a social unrest. So something was given, not as much as they could have got if there was free trade, but something, compensation took place. And you look at this. So this is what happened. This is what the MSP is This is what the domestic prices were, these were the international prices. So we are still below that. Same thing in wheat, roughly. This we worked out because one of my good friends, Surjit Bhalla, has been writing that our prices are 55% above the world price or 90% above the world price. Our MSP of 14-15 wheat was about $226. And if you look at what Pakistan was giving to its farmers was $280. You look at what China was giving to its farmers, $388, $390 roughly. And they procured 54 million tons at a price. You look at rice, same story, what China was paying or other countries are paying. Now this thing, Thailand has changed now because that scheme, which was causing all the mess in Thailand and the global stocks, I think that has changed, so this will change dramatically. But we are not very much out of line with the international scenario on that. So where do we go from here? What the policymakers hopefully can do. Containing farm labor costs, because that was coming as one of the major factors. How do we control that? The good news is the farm wages have started decelerating. If we look at October 13 over October 12, the increase in farm wage was about 14%, but October 12 over October 11 was 21%. So there is some indication that perhaps this may be decelerating because overall growth in the country has decelerated. The demand for labor perhaps will be decelerating. So there could be some deceleration here, but jury is still out. Can we dovetail Manrega with agriculture operations? At CACP we have been recommending to the government that especially labor-intensive operations in agriculture, like rice transplanting. Now, can we say that the farmer will give 100 rupees and 100 rupees will come from Manrega and the worker will still get 200 rupees? And thereby we can contain the cost and thereby the pressure on MSPs also will be. But operationally it's a major challenge. Or do certain things which can increase productivity effectively on check dams and water harvesting, although in theory they do say that they are doing that, but there are no systematic studies to show what has been the impact of Manrega in terms of agriculture productivity. I think incentivizing farm mechanization, this is coming up automatically by market forces. Mechanization, if you look at the tractor sales and all that, will give you an idea. And this is to contain basically the labor costs. It's not only the costs are increasing, but labor is not available in many pockets of the country now. Global food increases, as I showed in the graph earlier, have been tapering off. Global stimulus, after 2008-9 when the global stimulus G20 that was given, I think that is also likely to taper down, and that will have, at present the whole tide is up in the international market, and that's what also floated the commodity markets up. I think once that is settled, we will have some relief from that. There are pockets where trade policy can be used to tame food prices. You look at our import policy. If our prices of certain commodities are going up, vegetables in particular, for example, most of the vegetables have an import duty of 30%. Fruits, vegetables, tomatoes, potatoes, tomato paste, garlic is at 100%. This is the import duty. You look at milk, skimmed milk powder, beyond the in-quota tariff, it's 60%. Chicken legs, cut pieces, 100%. Apples, 50%. So there is a possibility that you can bring the tariffs low, 10%, 15%, whatever you feel is comfortably, because there are lobbies that operate. And definitely everybody wants to export and give export subsidy, but they don't want to let the imports in. That's not trade policy. And I'm sure there are people here would oppose reducing import policy. If that is the case, why don't we keep import tariff also on pulses at 50%? Why don't we keep tariff on edible oils also at 50%? Why the farmers of pulses and edible oils, what bad fortune they have that fruits and vegetables and others don't have? So I think we need to bring some symmetry in the trade policy, which can help, because international prices are coming somewhat down. This is perhaps the last slide. And contain fiscal deficit, tackle 3 Fs. I think food, fuel, food and fertilizers. I think fuel on the diesel front, government is perhaps on the track to reduce that subsidy. But food and fertilizer, this is a 200,000 crore budget. This budget is 115,000 crores for food. Sudhirji, correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that there are unpaid bills of almost 50,000 crores that he has been asking the government to pay the pending bills. Same thing is in fertilizer. 71,000 crores in the budget. There are about 38,000 crores of pending bills that the government has to make. Now, you cannot put it under the carpet for too long. If you want to do this, then bring it up front and say this is what the nation has to bear. Now, we feel that there is a possibility of a lot of savings in food and fertilizer subsidies. Our calculations show that if we move gradually towards cash transfers, you look at, I'll give you only one example. Today, Food Security Act says that we will give to 75% of the rural population wheat at 2 rupees a kg, 5 kg they will get. 75% of the rural population, majority of them may be farmers or those who are working on farm. Now, if they are going to get wheat at 2 rupees a kg, what will they do? Whatever wheat they produce, they will bring to the government first, buy at 14 rupees. That's the MSP, at least you give me that. And then give me back at 2 rupees. I have no problem if 14 rupees was being given at 2 rupees, but the moment our procurement system gets into action, the economic cost is about 20 rupees, but if you add the buffer stocking cost also of 4.7, it comes to 24 rupees 70 paise. So that thing has to be given back at 2 rupees. Why don't we say that we can give difference between 18 and 2 to the farmer so that the effective price is even more? Don't bring wheat to me, you get cash. So at least give option to the farmer that you want to get cash or you want to get your own wheat after recycling. So there is a possibility of a lot of savings on that. I would say whatever savings you can, our calculations show in both food and fertilizer, 25–30% savings can be there. And if you redirect those subsidies towards investment in agriculture, then your growth rate in agriculture can pick up much faster. So you will not have just 3.5% rate of growth, but 5% rate of growth. And that is the real answer to your food inflation, because productivity has to increase. But productivity will increase if you invest in agri R&D, if you have investment in irrigation and so on and so forth. And that is where we need a lot of money. The resources that are going to agriculture are not less, but 80% of those resources are going through subsidies and only 20% are going through investments. We need to reverse that. Only 20% subsidies and 80% investments, and you will have your agriculture flying. Other policies that can help, I think, want to congratulate the government on this issue of deciding to offload 15 million tons of grains from FCI, 5 million tons of rice and 10 million tons of wheat. I was asking Mr. Sudhir how fast it can come up. I think there is an issue of revamping FCI. The government has set up a committee. One will have to see what best and how to reduce the cost there. There are a lot of issues. It's not just the inefficiency question of the operations. There are a lot of state level taxes and other things that one needs to tackle, and the center will have to play a very proactive role. For the fresh, we have been talking for a long time that unless we set up the value chains in place, there is no relief that is going to come. These aberrations, spikes, sometimes it is onion, other day it is tomato, this will keep on coming out. APMC reforms, every person comes, earlier Mr. Rahul Gandhi had said, APMC, fruits and vegetables, take it out, then this government also advised. I'm told even Delhi is not done yet. So even if we cannot implement that policy even in Delhi after announcing all these things, you can imagine the APMC reforms, how far it is going. So I think we need to persevere with that and make it sure that things are done. But as we saw earlier in one of the graphs, the inflation in food, processed food is much lower. And I'm grateful that Siraj is here. That's where I think a major answer of stabilization of prices, both for the farmer and the consumer lies. I think we are playing at a much lower level compared to many of the countries in Southeast Asian economies, which are at 30 to 70% food processing. We are still hovering at 5%, 6%, 7%. So major changes are needed there. A warehouse receipt system, better monitoring of price data. I think I will stop here, and we would hear more about the Kisan Mandis that are being experimented in Delhi from the speakers. Thank you very much for your time.
So friends, it's difficult to supplement Dr. Gulati when he speaks on this subject. I can only elaborate some of the themes he has presented. A primary driver of food inflation today is economic structure diversified. The Indian economy is structurally diversified, and this is absolutely welcome. For the first time in 2011, the share of the workforce engaged in agriculture came down below 50%. Only 49% is engaged in agriculture. This is huge. This is the answer to many social problems that we have, primarily including the caste system. To break the correlation between birth and occupation, people need to move away from their traditional occupations, which mostly are related to agriculture, and move to new ones. And this can happen only when the economic structure diversifies. This has happened. When people are drawn into construction, when people are drawn into acting as security guards in cities, into the huge service industry that caters to newly emergent middle class in the urban centers of the country, there is a shortage of labor engaged in farming. The only way prices can stay still is if productivity goes up concurrently in the farming activity. This, unfortunately, is not happening. For productivity to go up, there are 2-3 things that must happen. There must be sufficient know-how, R&D, technological capability. But even if this technological capability exists in laboratories and farmers are willing to try them out, they must have an incentive to do that, which is what is missing today. When you pay 40 rupees, 60 rupees per kg of onions in the market in Delhi, what the farmer gets is at most 5 rupees a kilo. You pay 100 rupees, the farmer will get 6 rupees. So this transmission loss and the increase in price effectively reduces, deflates the incentive for the farmer to adopt superior technologies. This can change, as Dr. Gulati said, only when the farmer is fully integrated into the market system. And there are a number of obstacles to the Indian farmer getting integrated into the market system. The biggest one is the government. Month after month in the last year of the UPA 2, food grain prices went up 17%. And the blame lies squarely with the Ministry of Food. Their stocks were 80 million tons. When at the most, to service Sonia Gandhi's food security program, which ultimately did not get launched, you required perhaps 40-45 million tons. This excess storage of the government not only increased the cost of storage for the FCI and ultimately the food subsidy bill, It also took away gain from the market, pushing up prices 17%. This prevented the RBI from being able to cut its interest rates. This contributed to depressing overall economic growth. So should the government get away from taking all the grain out of the market? Another obstacle is actually the coal policy. If a farming has to modernize, if productivity has to go up in the rural areas, electricity must be available in rural areas. Today, after missing the deadline for probably 6 years, the government has finally succeeded in its rural electrification campaign, at least in terms of connecting villages to the grid. The Ministry of Power's report says that 5.9 lakh villages out of India's total of 6.5 lakh villages are connected by electric line. Unfortunately, the line is there, but power doesn't flow along these lines. So much so that I am told, my friends from Bihar tell me, being very practical people, some villagers in Bihar started selling these lines, taking them down and selling them as scrap. And why doesn't power flow to these lines? Again, because ultimately of bad politics. We have a state monopoly in coal, which is paved the way for this coal scam that we are now dealing with. Our requirement is X. There is a state monopoly called Coal India Limited, which is capable of mining only a fraction of X. So we import coal. At one point, 3 years ago, we imported coal to run a power plant situated right on the pithead, right where the coal is mined. Now, why should there be a state monopoly in coal mining? Why can't you allow professional miners to come and invest in this country, which has the first largest reserves of coal in the world, take out as much coal as required, and run our power plants? If our power plants today, between 2004 and 2014, power generation capacity in this country doubled from 114,000 megawatt to more than 229,000 megawatt. But right now, 60,000 megawatt is lying idle. This kills the economy. If the money you have invested, the capital you have formed, cannot actually produce even 1 rupee worth of yield. Your aggregate capital output ratio goes up. Your banks accumulate bad loans, non-performing assets. Your entire economy becomes a mess. And why doesn't our power system work? After years of reform, even today, 30% of the power that is generated is not paid for. Some is lost. You don't invest enough in our transmission distribution system, so there are technical losses, probably around 10%. The rest is straightforward theft. We give farmers free power. This is a claim. That much transferred officer in Haryana, Kenka, he did a rough calculation that if you used subsidized water to produce every single grain in Haryana, the power that is required would be 1/5 of the power that is actually claimed to be consumed by the power sector. You line a draw from the unmetered power connection of a pump set and you run whatever little industry you have. The steel plants in Mandi Govindgarh at one point were the most energy efficient steel plants in the entire world because the electricity bill was zero. Now, how can we have a viable power sector if politicians believe that patronizing power theft is one of their functions as political leaders? So we have a dysfunctional power system. We have a dysfunctional coal mining system. So we have shortage of coal. So the power lines that have been drawn to villages lie defunct without supplying power, and therefore starving the villages of that needed energy, which would help improve farm productivity and create the value addition we talked about. You need a cold chain. You need a cold chain if you have to move fresh produce from rural areas to the urban consumption centers. For that you need power. It's not feasible, it's not viable to run them on imported diesel. And of course, this correction of diesel prices is one of the factors that has been increasing farm costs. Another thing we need urgently is collective organized agency for the farmers. We have a white revolution, we had a white revolution thanks to the cooperative movement launched by Dr. Kuri. Now this cooperative movement could not succeed everywhere, it had succeeded only in Gujarat, primarily because Gujarat had good roads. If a truck sets out in the morning to collect milk and it comes back in the afternoon, but by that time it must be able to collect sufficient milk to justify a processing plant. If the roads are bad or the truck breaks down halfway between and is able to cover only a short distance, it will not be able to procure enough milk to justify a milk plant. So you need good roads and power and organization of farmers if you need to actually increase productivity through such mechanized efficiency. So we need power, we need agency for farmers to organize them into people who are capable of bargaining with larger commercial entities who are procuring this stuff. Plus we need good roads. Many parts of the system are now in place. Many parts of the country have good roads. We have what Dr. Gulati described, warehouse receipts. There is a warehouse development authority. Warehouse receipts are now negotiable instruments. A farmer can actually give stuff is produced to the warehouse, get receipts, and they can be discounted for cash. He is no longer, technically speaking, at the mercy of the large APMC mandi controller. Finally, the APMC, which is also a government-controlled impediment to markets working in this country. Why have this APMC controlling all farm produce? At least for fresh produce, it should be exempt. Delhi, which has no farmer, only consumer, still has an APMC. After losing elections in other states, Sonia Gandhi instructed all her chief ministers to dismantle the APMC in their own states, at least take vegetables out of their purview. Not one chief minister, not even in Delhi. Narendra Modi, all-powerful prime minister, whom everybody now adores, he told people to dismantle the APMC. He raided on the traders in Delhi for onion and other holding. The APMC in Delhi is controlled by the Lieutenant Governor now, directly under the control of the central government. Nobody has the guts to touch the APMC. So if the political class doesn't have guts and the will to act on what they...
Yes, we do have tomato selling and there is a consumer who is buying at 2,400 kg. The challenge is how to increase that high value agriculture, and it's hardly I didn't know before Mr. Sharma talked about the 3/4 of Indian agriculture moving toward high value, then certainly there is a possibility of a global shift which is happening in the price regime, and we should be able to, if 2,400 rupees the price of tomato which is grown in Holland, there is a transportation cost, there is a freight cost, there is duties and so on and so forth. If Indian farmer can actually grow that at 200 rupees a kg, it is significantly an improvement over what his earnings are, and that earnings when they get back into society, it will certainly help him and the economy as a whole. So India 3, food inflation will continue to be a challenge. Yes, we understand and we recognize that there is a large level poverty which Dr. Gulati talked about. But I think as we are saying that India is growing, incomes are growing, farm incomes are growing, industrial incomes are growing, it is a shift which will happen, and I think even India 3 will begin to consume more nutritive food, because I think that is the way people are looking at it, that even if you have one meal a day, at least have it in a kind of more nutritive sense than just filling your stomach. Changing India 1 and India 2 will redefine the way we look at food prices. So we will continue to have inflation. I'm sorry, I know we are standing here challenging and questioning why inflation, but I personally believe that inflation is here for us to face it. I think it's a question of value for money more than inflation. It is something we need to understand and recognize that if we are wanting to have more nutritive food, if we are wanting to have more quality food, if you want to have food at par with what international community is eating, then we should be willing to pay more for it. There will be inflationary trend. There is an inflation in terms of farm labor, which we heard. There is inflation in terms of all the petroleum products. Power, I mean, I don't know whether power will become cheaper. Availability, yes, is a question. But can a farming community afford the power at the cost at which it is being produced? And if he or she does it, what will the impact of it on the commodity prices? We will have to be very cognizant of it and not ignore it, saying that inflation is something which can be, yes, artificially we can temporarily take knee-jerk onion prices or potato, discussing stock limits and things like this. Yes, it's possible. But is that a global phenomenon? Is that a sustainable proposition? Is that a long-term proposition? At least my personal view is it is not. I think this is something which Dr. Gulati talked about, so I don't want to repeat this. I am saying that let's redefine the way we look at the market correction. Redefine the way we look at inflation. Market correction is bound to happen. That's accepted. Consumer is willing to pay for the right values. Absolute price does not matter. We have been talking about percentages. Let's get into absolute prices and we compare the prices in the world market with India. I think we still get food much cheaper than anywhere else in the world. Import duty relaxation removal can open up access to global food. There is a lot of, and I was reading an article very recently which talked about, a lot of policy makers, so I don't want to make very bold statements, but I was reading that FSSI is rejecting containers after containers on some labeling related issues. And the food which is getting imported into this country is getting wasted at the ports. And that article talked about that do we know how we are processing food which is being very happily sold in this country. And we are challenging globally produced, which at least if nothing else, is far more nutritive and has far more hygienic value. So I think we need to be cognizant of what we are doing and why we are doing and how to implement a particular policy which is, the intentions are good, how to execute it in a manner that it actually serves the society for which those policies are being made and not kind of being deterrent to it. Some of the policy reforms, I'm repeating I think most of it which has already been said, so we need to look at the whole philosophy of an MSP, how import duties have to be decided, consolidation of farming land. I think Mr. Sharma's initiative in terms of creating cooperative or the groups of the farmers is an excellent proposition. I think that's the way to go. When the farmer become a body which are collective body, it will make a significant difference. APMC I think is a much talked about subject. Yield improvement I think is the way to go. I personally believe that the day we can actually create excess supply, the inflation or the demand or whatever will automatically disappear. There is a lot of resistance even from the farming community who says that if I produce more, maybe the cost of production will be higher and I may not get, because the arrival in a particular market on a particular day could be higher and I may not get the commensurate prices. I think there's an element of education involved in it, there's an element of back-end kind of scientific methods involved. So all the input companies, all the farm implants companies, etc., everybody has to join in and take this as an initiative, take this as a lead for it to kind of make a significant difference. And food processing is something, I think we have talked about it. I mean, you noticed, we have just seen in Dr. Gulati's presentation that food processing inflation is much lower than the raw level. It's all to do with wastages, it's all to do with what kind of values. Of course, the value of that is higher, so percentage inflation could be lower, but in terms of preservation and conservation, that's the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Praveen, for highlighting the consumer side also to the picture. We will open the floor for discussion now.
Yes.
And what we will do is pick up 5 questions in first round, and then we'll try to respond. Then the second round we can have another 5 questions. How many hands are there? First, let's see here. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Why don't you go ahead? I'm coming.
Well,
Yeah.
I have some observations. Obviously, I'm not an economist like you, but more as a practitioner, where as a result I again have a slightly different perspective. You said that agriculture grew at about 4-5%. That's what you said.
4.1.
Inflation.
Only in the 11th plan.
Yeah, that's it. I'm talking. Inflation happened at about 8 to 10%. Then clearly the farmer should have benefited a lot. But the reality is that the farmer has not benefited. The reason why he has not benefited because the gap between the farmer price and the consumer price has in fact widened rather than coming down. And therefore, where has that money gone? The money has, and in fact, to say that higher wage cost to the farmer has contributed to inflation, in my view, is a very small component. And the reason is because if tomatoes are sold at let's say 50 rupees, the farmer is getting 10. 40% of that is labor cost, which is 4 rupees. On that in inflation, it's not going to contribute. And again, I'm speaking as a practitioner. The reason for the inflation, and I think the only one who's really touched upon, in my view, which is really critical, is Mr. Arun, is transaction cost. And I think it's transaction cost between the farmer and the consumer, which is really the cause of inflation. And now what is this transaction cost? It's not just the APMC, but it's many more things. And again, I'll give you a practitioner's example. I was buying milk from Rajasthan and in UP. I was selling it at the same price in Delhi. But I was paying the farmer in UP exactly half of what I was paying to Rajasthan. And the reason why I paid half was because the transaction cost in UP was twice. Because there was no electricity, what Arun said. There was no electricity, so I had to put batteries to run the machines. There was no electricity to recharge the batteries, so I had to send a vehicle to bring the batteries back, recharge them again. So I think we need to focus on transaction cost, which will bridge the gap between consumer prices and farmer prices.
Sure.
And there's no shortcut for that, but getting better infrastructure.
Basically power and roads and...
Yeah, so I think the issue is not so much of APMC. The issue is not so much of productivity. The issue is really of transaction cost. Thank you.
Yeah. Can we go there, please? Yeah.
Can you just request them to
I'll try and ask.
Yeah.
I'll try and ask short question.
That was Arjun from DSCL.
Yeah, I'll try and ask a question and not try to answer it myself
Could
because
you introduce yourself?
name is Bohidar. I'm Natarajan Bohidar. Many years, some years with Nestle, but now I'm a consultant and I try to see these things slightly more totality. There are two myths in the urban mind, and I thought the panel might like to address it. You actually have, but there's been a little bit of inconsistency in the manner in which you addressed it. One is that mechanization leads to productivity. I mean, it may be a myth, it may be a truth, we really don't know because there isn't much mechanization yet in this country. I notice this prices of Apple at 80 and 120, and I'm told that apples, being where they are in the food chain, are more labor intensive and therefore they have actually contributed to growth at 4.1%, the bottom end of the farmers, and the power may be inconsistent. So I'm a little worried about whether this myth about mechanization leads to productivity are 2 points in the system which don't necessarily connect with a short line. The second myth which I'd like you to address is, why do we always believe that international companies like Walmart can for some wild reason get that same food to us at much lower prices? We seem to have all the answers here, and yet we believe that there's something lacking in this whole APMC or whatever the system is. These are the two myths, and I'd like you to address this. The whole panel, anyway, thank you.
Sir, I wanted to ask, what is the middle path? What is the middle path for the coming 6 months or 1 year or 2 years from the government perspective? My question is specific to Pravesh Sharma sir and Gulati sir. Yeah. So what is the middle path in perspective of governance? Because as they say, this government is pro-growth, pro-infrastructure development. These things are all okay. But with this, we all understand that inflation will go as so as the food inflation. Because saying that farmer wages have increased 19% in UPA 2, this also means that at some level 7 to 8% farmers have benefited out of that 19%. So it's a good trend. as a layman, I would understand. So where is the middle path? Whether we should allow this food inflation to grow along with inflation as a part of growth story, and let the food security bill take care of the 1/3 of the population which don't have food access, because as sir said, we don't have enough supply. We have 17% of the food grain supplied in the world if we take the average of rice and wheat, and we have the 16% of the world population. So I wanted to know the middle path from the government perspective.
I wanted to understand that why the Indian companies who have built distribution outlets like Reliance Fresh, etc., they have not actually gone aggressively to create these cold chains. If the arbitrage is as great as what we believe in the, whether it's the transaction costs at the APMC and in the mandi, so it's in other words, it's unfortunate that this government has this wrong idea about the Walmarts and the foreign retailers. But why Indian retailers have not come up? I mean, they have performed well in cell phones and many other areas. Why didn't they do it in retail, in multi-brand retail? So that's a question in my mind. Because frankly, just take 1 second. I have seen the role that the large supermarkets have played in China, Indonesia, Philippines, and Latin America. And there it's transformed the agriculture of those countries, what these companies have done. So ignoring the fact that this government has this lunatic obsession about this, nevertheless, it would be helpful why the local companies have not done it.
Okay, I think you think about an answer.
My name is Tushar Pandey. I work for Yes Bank, and I'm also doing a little bit of research on small farmer innovation. My question is twofold. One is something which I'm working on is to compare how the farmer aggregation has helped the farmer before they were aggregated, and what Pravesh mentioned about. But my question is that an aggregation of farmers in areas, or maybe they may not be farmers currently, they may be doing some rudimentary agriculture or maybe no agriculture, and is aggregation also a factor which can help convert those areas straight away into high value agriculture? One is that we talk about mountain areas which climatically has potential for high value, but maybe some other parts of India where currently there is no agriculture, so something can be offsetted for the land valuations, problem of land in the commercial areas which has a real estate play, and therefore farmers don't want to do farming. Is there some work, or is the maybe a question to Pravesh, the FPO model also trying to get into that direction?
Okay, we had our 5 questions, and let's have you want to.
Good evening, my name is Ajay, I'm a farmer and I'm representing a farmers organization. And I would choose to disagree with most of the panelists when they talk about importing fruits and vegetables. You know, it's like a huge jigsaw puzzle. And we quote figures of support. In your graph, you've given support price for wheat and rice. But before we talk about importing fruits and vegetables, you need to give figures for support fruits and vegetables in the Western countries. How much they gave farmers to get quality produce.
Right.
No, I'm not finished. Then second thing in the puzzle, there's another piece which is a level playing field before you allow people to compete. You can't ask someone who's 10th class pass to compete with someone who's an IIM. You got to create a level playing field and then allow fruits and vegetable imports. And I really think from a farmer's point of view, it's absolutely absurd to even talk about importing fruits and vegetables on duty-free prices in the structure that we are. Thank you.
I think you need to respond to why the private sector is not coming.
Yeah. I think the answer lies in the transaction cost and yeah, the answer lies in the transaction cost and the volume both. If you look at the fragmentation of the fresh stores and consolidation of them over a period of time into hypermarkets in this country has happened only because of the way the business houses had to consolidate from various farmers and consolidate at another consumer level, and the transaction cost of it was so high that they were associated with
in what area? Which transaction cost?
the cost of procurement and collection from fragmented farmers at one level and reaching it to various distribution houses, which are the retail outlets. So the total cost became so high that ultimately you realize that you were always selling fruit and vegetable, even if you went and bought it directly from the farmer at a loss, than the price at which, so you could never compete with the traditional distribution system of mandis. And that is where the challenge was, that any amount of investment, the ultimate objective of making investments in the beginning, when the retail revolution took place in, let's say, 2006 or 2007, was that the infrastructure will pay for the wastages control. And hence the corporate houses will be able to balance the cost dynamics of running that infrastructure. But ultimately, when the transaction came forth and people realized what's happening, then the cost economics just did not work.
But this goes totally against all what the other panelists have been saying.
Yeah, so consolidation of farming, as I said, what Mr. Sharma is doing at one level, so that there is a large farmer house which you as a retailer go consolidate.
But you're suggesting that the mandi is more efficient than buying straight from the farmer, whereas everybody, all the wisdom here,
As long, no, I'm not saying mandi is more efficient. I'm only saying that the consumer price at the mandi level was lower than the consumer price at retail outlets because of transaction costs.
We're not considering the retail outlets. We're talking about the cost from buying directly from the farmer,
yes,
and buying from the mandi. And we are saying that the transaction costs in the mandi are higher, therefore it's cheaper to buy from the farmer. You're not making sense.
No, but what we are saying is that the consumer is buying from both channels, and prices will always continue to get compared between the two channels. Yes? So if that is what is happening, and my transaction cost between farm to my store is higher than the traditional system, because my buying is happening at the same platform. I am also not being allowed to buy directly from the farmer or doing a contract farming or a contact farming, which many retailers try to do.
So you're saying that Walmart would do a very good job of the last mile?
But I don't know what they will do. I can't comment on
Last
that.
mile probably.
Okay, so I think you need to.
So can I just make a quick comment? Just to address your question, we built a system of buying vegetables directly from the farmer and selling it to retailers, right? And we failed miserably because the transaction cost of the existing system is much lower. And he's right by saying that the transaction cost is far too high for the organized sector to be buying directly from farmers. It works well for milk because it's a uniform commodity. It doesn't work for vegetables. I've done both myself, and in milk it works very well. It doesn't work in vegetables.
The one word, if I could just supplement, the one word which both the gentlemen have not used is volumes.
Yes.
You see, their transaction costs are higher, and this is what he's saying is echoed by every major retailer whom we had dialogue with in the last 2 years, because we were trying to build the relationship between Reliance and Big Bazaar and More and everyone and our farmer producer organizations. And everyone came back to us and said, the volumes that we are selling do not justify back-end investment because I cannot recover these sunk costs with these volumes. If you look at the growth of organized retail in the West, in North America, it took 15 years before they touched fresh produce. They began with packaged goods. When they built muscle and scale, then they touched fresh produce. In Europe, it took 10 years. In China, it took them 5 years. Now, we of course are great believers in the theory of Indian exceptionalism, so we believe it will happen immediately. Even if it is, possible to have all the multinationals here tomorrow, they will not get into fresh as a back-end investment on day one. The point that Arjun makes, the mandis are efficient because of the volumes they handle. Azadpur handles 15,000 metric tons of fruits and vegetables daily. I was in Paris in May. The Rungis market, which is the biggest fruits and vegetable market in Europe, handles 5,000 tons a day. So, in terms of volume, it would take a long time for any corporate player to build that scale. And that's why they prefer to rely on the traditional mandis. We are hoping that over a period of time, if some of the back-end infrastructure could be shared by the FPOs, certainly the collection center, pack house, etc., the corporates would get into buying it. But it's going to take time. That's
one last thing. So I think so everyone's talking about reducing transaction costs. And I think so to reduce transaction costs, you need to increase the connection points rather than decrease it to a few corporate houses. And to increase connection points, you need farmers markets. If you allow farmers to come and sell the produce at designated markets in every locality, they will come, they will aggregate themselves. You don't need let's not try and complicate things by building structures like FPOs and all. If you give place, let's say in Basantpur for farmers to come and sell, 20 farmers will get together, whatever they've grown, they'll get it to the market and then sell it. So
I'm not so sure, sir. I've just been buying from the farmers market in the US.
We need to now go through the discussion.
The farmers market has cost in the US.
And last thing is that why are not more cold chains coming up? Is because the urban consumer is not ready to pay for quality. No, they're not ready to pay for quality. The urban consumer
And it's expensive power.
Yeah.
It's actually 10 cents, whereas the rest of the world operates about 5 cents per unit. Okay, I think that's a very exciting discussion. There are a few questions which we need to respond to. If others are not taking up those questions, I'll take up. Have farmers gained? And wage rate is not a major determinant of cost or inflation. Interestingly, when I joined the government and I traveled extensively, and 3 questions I used to put to wherever I'll go. Give me 3 biggest problems farmers are facing, every corner. This was my standard. And invariably, one of these top 3 was that there is no labor, or if labor is available, it's very expensive. So saying that labor doesn't have an impact, labor costs rising, it has never happened in the history, the graph that I showed you. It has never happened in Indian history. And farmers cannot supply at below the cost, right? They may not recover the imputed rent on their land or fixed capital, but they have to recover what they are paying from the pocket. Interestingly, we also looked at what has happened to profitability structures. Dr. Vishwas is here, and we worked out a big paper on that issue, that at the beginning of 2000 and towards the end of 2000 decade, the profitability in most of the crops in most of the states has increased. Whether it was the global factors or this increasing prices, higher inflation, so there is an improvement. There could be some pockets which are under distress, but overall the profitability structures have improved, and that paper is very much on the website. Transaction costs, of course, we agree that that's mechanization and productivity question. Mechanization is coming up, it has picked up momentum. I would say because of the hard labor costs. You look at what rate the tractors were selling. 15 to 20% was the growth of tractors during the last 3 to 5 years, when the rest of the automotive industry and others were crying because labor is becoming. So there is a point when the labor costs start becoming more expensive and capital substitutes that. And if you are giving, loans at, reasonable interest rate, it picks up. I think it is coming up. And that saves on time. When that saves on time, you can have more cropping intensity on the same plot. So the solution of raising productivity, where farmers are investing, it is basically in pump sets or farm mechanization. Pump set means water. Water means higher productivity. So saying that will not lead to higher productivity, I am surprised. And the farm mechanization is saving on time. So you can increase the cropping intensity, which also raises productivity. My only submission and concern on farm mechanization is that you have small plots. And this is a fixed capital. So what is the optimal utilization? So we should not over capitalize, because that will raise your cost of production. So how do we do that? Through custom hiring or freeing up the land lease market, and that's where all these new models are coming up. If you look at what is happening on sugar cane harvesters and the new models the companies are coming up with, it's very interesting, but it's a debate. There is a question of middle path. What is the middle path? You know, each of the government would agree that up to 5% rate of inflation, that is digestible in the system. But 10% rate of food inflation, I can tell you, it is a nightmare for any political party. So the middle path is, if you have 7 to 8% rate of growth and less than 5% rate of inflation, it is perfectly fine for the society, it's an equilibrium. But if you have 10% rate of inflation and 5% rate of growth, you are in trouble. So we need to balance that. Aggregation, high value, I think that's the same point you are
supporting my
making. Ajay, my great friend, farmer friend on the import tariffs, don't bring it down on fruits and vegetables. We have discussed it a number of times. My only submission is, what is the sin that the pulses farmers have committed or oilseed farmers have committed? Are they that they can compete, but not the fruits and vegetable farmers? I think the lobby of fruits and fruits, particularly Apple's lobby, is perhaps much more strong than any. So my feel is that on the import policy, you know, trade policy is both ways. It is exporting as well as importing. Today, Indian agriculture in 13-14 exports are $42 billion, imports are $17 billion. There is a net surplus of $25 billion. Now, on one commodity you have zero import duty, but on other you have 100% import duty. It smacks of more of lobbying than a trade policy strategy. So I would say, okay, you want to have 10%, 15%, you decide what is the, but I have a someone. But we agree to disagree on that question. We still remain friends on that. Okay. Well, this was all. I hope I have not missed any other question on this one. I would very much request and hope, because the action handle is in the hands of two luminaries are here who are really at present part of the system. And Sudhir, can I request you to speak a few words on, because he said food ministry is responsible for nutrition. Would you respond to him? But one thing I think I should tell the audience, because we have been discussing in our corridors, we sit at the same, we used to sit in the same room. You know, very quietly and very smartly, I would say, Mr. Sudhir has reduced the stocks from 80 million tons to 73 and then to 67, and he was telling me by next it will be roughly 55 or so. So how he is doing that, maybe he can reveal some. But something on this question of government's decision also on liquidating 15 million tons.
Thank you, sir. I just came here to listen, not to say anything. But if you want to speak, basically the department is procuring wheat and rice. And the problems in the two are different. If we procured 360 or 380, 2 years back, it was due to our wrong policies. What we have tried now is to encourage private sector to be in the market. And we have let them know that the government will not be offloading stocks at a very low rate. When I joined, there was a huge demand, market is dry, raise the food grains. I asked them, why do you prepare in the market?
that the government sees. And response was, the government sells it below cost or less than MSP, will be at a loss. And I assured them, no, this is not happening. The results has been that from 360 or 380 we came down to 250.
That's 250 lakh tons.
A beat of wheat. And this year slightly again, it was slightly more due to bonus and impact of bonus in these two states. Now we have made it known to the states that if they declare bonus, and there is surplus procurement.
This is a very bold step. Please listen to
Disposal
that.
will be responsibility of the state. But I think with these steps that we have taken, fixing the price for open market seemed realistically. Of course, I wanted to put an element of carrying cost every month, but then I restrained myself. Otherwise, my economist friend and the newspaper I read, it says government is adding cost and inflation every month. Therefore, the price at which we are offloading wheat is not increasing, it is fixed, whether it is August or December. But these two things, 2-3 steps, I am hopeful wheat procurement will be limited to our requirement of PDS operations. In the rice, I realized the problems were different. We procure paddy and then it has to be processed. There are some wild practices going on. The bonus are also there. So reduce the period of delivery. We increase the storage capacity. FCI has added almost 120 lakh tons in the last 2 years storage capacity to private participation in PG schemes. So all these things are helping. So suddenly we realize this problem of levy. Higher levy, all other malpractices and higher stocks. So these two decisions, one for wheat, no bonus, that applies to paddy as well. Reducing levy altogether, bringing down to 25% this year, or no levy from next year, will bring our food grain stocks within limit of our requirement. But if next year, for some reason, whether I don't know, stocks are even lower, let me say we are offloading, we are supplying roughly 60 lakh tons for various programs, ICDS, schools and all that. They can buy it from the market as well. Because it is costing a higher cost at economic cost to the government. If they are allowed to buy from the market, I don't think there will be much distortion. They will be able to manage even them. But the subsidy cost to the government, let me correct one thing, the economic cost is not that high. Once we are managing the stocks well, within limits, the economic cost is not increasing that much. For wheat, it may be around 19 to 20 rupees. But sir, one has to keep in mind when the government buys anything, cost may appear to be high, we pay every tax, we pay every operation in the mandi.
Punjab imposes 14.5%. That's.
So even if you exclude that, all the other VAT, every state is imposing cost of gunning bag, labor cost, handling, cleaning, all these things are paid. But private trade, when they are buying, they ask the farmer to deliver with all these things at MSP. Then the cost is borne by the farmer.
Well, thank you very much. This was very useful for those who are not aware with the intricacies of this procurement business. There are a few states which are giving very high bonus. It's good that they are thinking of the farmers. I really admire those states. But why only for wheat and rice? With that great bonus, the private sector is driven out, everything comes to the government. And what if they can change that policy to give 5,000 or 10,000 rupees per hectare to all the farmers? Why only wheat and rice? So a change in the policy can help perhaps on that. Siraj, can I? On food processing, some new light because your minister, you are very proactive now to promote, and we are looking forward India should be reaching somewhere nearer to the Southeast Asian levels.
Thank you very much. No, I will not say much about food processing, but I fully appreciate the concern as to why the private sector corporates have failed to build an efficient supply chain for fresh fruits and vegetables when they can do it for every other product, and why e-commerce has failed to even touch the fresh sector. I think the answer is not very difficult. The very small land holdings, the inability of the consumers in most cases to pay, or the willingness of most consumers to pay even a slightly higher price. But I must tell you that at least in 2 or 3 crops, we have made good progress. Apple is one example, where Indian apples are now available even during summers. So earlier, the Indian apples would not be available after March. But now, Indian apples are available up to at least 15th May or end of May. Even though, and we disagree with Professor Gulati, even though Government of India wrongly at some point of time agreed to reduce the import duty to only 50%. So in case of apple, the maximum import duty which we can impose only 50%. And that is why you see India swamped by Chinese, American and apples from Argentina and all other countries. But Indian corporates have been able to build a good supply chain for apples, and that is for a variety of reasons. Similarly, in case of grapes, there is a good supply chain contributed substantially by the cooperatives in Maharashtra, and Indian grapes export last year was about 2,500 crores, and you can trace a grape consignment to a farmer, even in case of India. A similar supply chain is coming in case of banana, where a lot of corporates are taking interest, but it is nowhere in sight for most other vegetables. And despite the investment which is going in the cold chain sector, the requirement is much too high compared to what we are actually doing. In the last 10 years, we have constructed 10 million tons of cold chain capacity, while the gap is 30 million. So we are nowhere near meeting the requirement of cold chain capacity. The industry says that it is not a viable business, and the government thinks that it is not worth subsidizing enough. So there is some kind of communication gap between what the corporates want and what the government is willing to give.
I may add a little bit here. We take so much pride in terms of that India is a model in terms of building value chain of the milk, and that is with the smallholders. Now, who made all those investments? Was it the corporate sector? It was primarily the cheap money made available to Mr. Kurian by monetizing the aid of EC at that time. So there is a social function when you are building all this. Now you are asking the corporate to do those investments at 12%, 14% rate of interest, and then where do they recover from? So I think we have to understand that when you are going from milk to all these fruits and vegetables, there is a case of public investment at the back end along with the private sector or co-ops or farmer producer organizations. Somebody has to do that because the externalities would be to a large number of smallholders. So that case has to be made. I think we are very much reluctant to go ahead in that line. And that's why there are hiccups. There are a few ones who are making global value chains. Not for, that whole thing on success story of Maha Grapes is primarily driven by the global value chain, because the price that they get there is 70 rupees, 60 rupees, 80 rupees. So where the market, but if you put an export control today on grapes, because domestic prices are taking a lift, it's finished. So where the value chain will build. So I think we have to learn. Anyway, this has been a wonderful, yes sir. You have a question? All right sir. Yes sir. You are ready to sit up to 9 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay.
Rakesh Kakkad from India Habitat Center. I think right through the discussion, you have been talking about the need to increase productivity, increase food processing, investment in cold storage. All of this is capital intensive. If you have high interest rates, all this investment is going to be less productive. So my question is to Dr. Gulati. Do you think that the RBI is actually shooting itself in its feet by insisting on high interest rates to control inflation, whereas actually inflation can be controlled by lowering the interest rate?
Well, first thing, I feel the interest rates, the real interest rates in India are not very high. I don't really agree on that. But whether keeping high interest rate is a solution to control food inflation, I beg to differ from my great friend Raghu on that. Right? I feel there are other structural things, and the bigger blame lies here in the North Block. High fiscal deficit. Unless you control that, I think we let loose the fiscal policy and we have not been able to control that. So unless that is controlled, you had inflation of food in 4%, 6%, and that was perfectly comfortable. Yes, one commodity can have a spike even during Vajpayee time, onion. But overall food inflation during that period was just 4%.
But global prices were highly depressed.
And yes, so that, but now the global prices are on the decline, and still our prices are, I think, if you look at the economists, those 40 countries at the back, I think India's rate of inflation is one of the second highest after Venezuela or some such country. So why we are, and that's what we are saying, if you are keeping very high import duties, you are not allowing the equilibrium to take place. But that's a different thing. Yes, sir. Levy. Yeah. 1 second. Let me have him first, and then you will ask.
We've been talking about food processing,
yes, sir.
But I think we have to be very careful on the way we are trying to set. We have been trying to sell food processing for many, many years.
Yes, sir.
You need a surplus of product, not to save wastage or something. You need product at an international price. All the tomato paste is coming out of different countries now.
Sure.
Similarly, probably the fruit concentrates are coming out from another country and be packaged in Nepal or something and be shipped out. So it's, to talk about food processing has to be with a lot of caution, I think. You have to have produce at an international price before one can even think of processing. And international quantity, capacities. People are talking about 200 tons of tomatoes per hour. We only went up to 20 tons per hour.
So the productivity has to go up, the scale has to go up, and only then we can succeed. Yes. Yes, sir.
Nobody has talked about the number 2 economy, impact of number 2 economy in the
Dr. Tejinder Singh, who is going to write tomorrow.
So, I don't know. Yeah. This is a fact that if 50% of Indian economy is a black economy, so it will definitely have an impact on the retail inflation of fruit and vegetable. And I think this thing has not been touched or discussed.
So what you are saying is the parallel economy is putting a lot of demand pressure, and therefore there will be inflation.
So people are, people have the money to pay 100 rupees per kg. So,
all right.
Okay. So, as a farmer also dealing with the number 2 economy.
Okay. I think we have to end now. I think we can discuss now. Yeah. Well, it has been a great session for me particularly, and on behalf of India Habitat Center, particularly Rakesh ji, who is the brain behind this setup, and all the panelists. May I request you to